before this video starts, I would love to give a huge thank you and shout out to my two cult tier patrons, Charlie and Daydairy. I love you guys so much. And I promised that I'd actually get into doing all this shit again. And here we are. So, on with the video. So we all know what yaoi is, right? Also known as BL, Boys Love, Shonen Ai, or Boizurabu, yaoi is a Japanese form of fictional media that features romantic and or sexual relationships between male characters, typically created by and for women. This factor forms the crux of today's video. While yaoi originated in Japanese manga, anime, video games, novels, it has evolved into the West as more of a cultural label rather than strictly a genre, meaning that it can be applied to a variety of more contemporary phenomena such as fanfiction or original character concepts within fandom. In both cases, it provides an outlet for male characters in media that are canonically heterosexual to be depicted as men-loving men. As I mentioned, yaoi is famous for its popularity among women, with many citing their enjoyment stemming from the lack of gendered inequality between the two lovers, or seeing their gender of preference engaging romantically or sexually with one another without the implication of an unrelatable female protagonist. The TLDR is, it's a fantasy of a dynamic which women, especially straight women, desire for themselves without resorting to stereotypes about women and their standing with men. This manifests in an emphasis on equality in its intimacy, not even necessarily sexual, which can be observed in yaoi content such as Junjo Romantica or Yuri on Ice, both of which are examples created by women where the dynamic in the homosexual relationships depicted is focused on protective devotion and an emotional bond rather than fetishistic and titillating. This is where Twilight enters the picture. Now, even if you weren't familiar with the concept of yaoi, you know what Twilight is. Even if you haven't read the books or watched the movies, you all know too well the classic tale of 17-year-old girl Bella Swan and her irrevocable romance with vampire Edward Cullen. The Twilight saga has remained an unstoppable cultural phenomenon from its debut in 2005, particularly among young women and girls, and has made several careers ranging from the author Stephanie Meyer herself to the actors involved with the film such as Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson and Taylor Lautner, to even bands like Muse, who rose to fame from hit songs that appeared on the film's soundtrack such as Supermassive Black Hole. In perhaps one of the cuntiest scenes in cinema, might I add. Now, it would be ignorant to ignore the adamant and vehement detraction and hatred the franchise has accumulated, often very misogynistically, even though it can be packaged under the guise of feminist critique. However, I wanted to reevaluate the franchise from a new lens, drawing parallels between the way that both yaoi and Twilight resonate and connect with a female demographic and why, ultimately, yaoi is just Twilight with straight people in it. Ever since its inception into popular culture, Twilight has functioned as a wish fulfillment fantasy for its reader. Bella Swan is, by design, supposed to be a reflection of the consumer. So while many critics sneer at her supposed blandness, which isn't even true, Bella has a lot of personality, especially in the books, she is by design a blank slate made for gaps to be filled with, depending on each person's particular tastes. Not only is this a genius way to minimize effort while maximizing relatability, it helps that the auteurs of the franchise, namely Stephanie Meyer, obviously, and to an extent Catherine Hardwicke and Melissa Rosenbach, who were the director and writer of the first film in the franchise, are women, as similarly to yaoi, it satiates a female demographic by default through their innate relatability and understanding of womanhood. This is exemplified by the first film installment compared to its sequels, as it centers yearning, romance, mood and aesthetics over action and quixotic Todorovian narrative structure.
I feel very protective of you.
This is why I describe the first film in the franchise as a feeling or a mood rather than a story. It's a glimpse at an ideal life that, while unrelatable to some, is deeply resonant with many women and girls. This is expanded upon heavily by Bella Swan as a protagonist. Contrary to popular belief, she is less a delicate waif whose female identity is core to her character and story, and more a character who just happens to be a woman, because realistically, Miss Stephanie Mormon Mayer is not about to be writing about gay emo vampires, no matter how 2005 that is. Regardless, before Bella's womanhood in Twilight becomes more relevant, such as her pregnancy and role as a mother in Breaking Dawn, although Mayer would have been years ahead of her time if Bella and Edward were a Shonen I Empire couple, Bella occupies an androgynous neutrality which at times feels very not like other girls, but at other times creates a dynamic between her and Edward that is heavily reminiscent of yaoi pairings written by women, with one taking on a more dominant and archaically masculine demeanor, with the other, while still being adamantly somewhat masculine or at least androgynous, being feminized as a way for female readers and perhaps its author too to project their own identity and presentation onto. This longing for wish fulfillment fantasy extends to what is arguably more important than the protagonists themselves, whether it be Bella Swan or a yaoi character perspective, the protagonist and their relationship with their significant other. This is the aspect of both Twilight and yaoi that initially made me draw the connection. Quick story time. A few days ago, one of my best friends and I were doing a drinking game to the first Twilight film, and one of the rules that we had was to take a shot for every time that Bella and Edward had like a prolonged staring session. And my God, there were so many. There were so many, in fact, that we had to remove the rule from the drinking game because we were going to run out of alcohol. This points to a dynamic that Bella and Edward share that is able to be powerfully intense and intimate with little to no direct sexuality. Though they are both brim with sensuality, it is born of devotion rather than lust. One of the most understandably popular reasons for women who enjoy Twilight and or yaoi written by women is its ability to understand what women want to see in a romantic partner. The most popular characteristics being devotion, protectiveness, and emotional connection. This even translates to yaoi fanfiction of Twilight, with pairings such as Edward/Jacob or Charlie/Carlisle, the latter of which I'm intimately familiar with, as the writers of these fics have the power to not only create one ideal partner, but two. If anything, Twilight is actually the perfect franchise for yaoi adaptations, as the floodgates are opened for other popular yaoi tropes such as Omegaverse dynamics to be easily implemented by using the plot devices of the werewolves. Seriously, the amount of Alpha Jacob and Sigma Edward content that exists is its own video essay. Despite the heterosexual nature of Edward and Bella as a couple, it doesn't take away from how Bella is a character primed for female projection, and Edward is curated to appeal to a broad number of women's taste in men. Mysterious, brooding yet sensitive, generous but most of all obsessed. Both Twilight and yaoi highlight the romanticization of having someone devote themselves to you, while both parties maintain a sense of equality. Now, I already know that me referring to the relationship between Bella and Edward as having a sense of equality is going to ruffle some feathers, so allow me to elaborate on what I mean. Although in many ways Edward is a very dominant figure in the relationship, such as his age, life experience, strength, and resources such as finance, I believe they are equal in an emotional sense, that being that they are as heavily obsessed as each other. This can be observed most through their respective POVs in the first Twilight novel, as well as Midnight Sun, which is the first book written from Edward's perspective. Bella states in one of the franchise's most iconic quotes that she is unconditionally and irrevocably in love with Edward, while in Midnight Sun, Edward muses to himself of the overpowering, all-consuming, crushing love he feels for Bella. Emotionally, they occupy the same playing field. She will do anything for him, and he will do anything for her. This bespeaks a sense of autonomy that can also be found in yaoi. Edward loves her so much that her needs and what is best for her is his main priority throughout the relationship. He's so obsessed with her that it gives her an abstract autonomy, although it is something she never directly takes advantage of. The displays of power contained within Twilight point to one of the main reasons that yaoi is so popular among women, that it presents a feminine figure without depicting a woman as inferior or weaker to a man. In both Twilight and yaoi, the sense of control given to a female reader is tantalizing. They offer a perfect fantasy where women are able to have control without being outwardly domineering or masculine, and most importantly, they can experience a comfortable equality in the relationship that they project onto, while still being able to relate to the gender dynamic they themselves can relate to, a balance between the masculine and the feminine. Therefore, yes, Twilight is literally just fucking yaoi. It's yaoi with straight people. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.